Global North see the UN as another cash cow, but the Global South know that its values in development aid and gender equality, you talked about climate change, all of those things. So the UN works better for different audiences, and it's just making sure that there's something for everyone. When we go to the Global North, for example, we talk about the kind of influence that they can have on their donor recipients and their donor, the partners that they have in the Global South. So we're saying different things to different member states to make sure that the relevance, the purpose is still there, the drive to stay connected with the UN is still there. I'm not sure if you remember, but Donald J. Trump pulled out of UNESCO when he was president. Biden rejoined UNESCO. So those are the kind of difficulties that we wrestle with at the UN. Different political parties and different political ideologies have different. Conservatives, for example, tend to be more hostile towards the UN, whereas left-leaning liberals tend to be more pro-UN. So different political levers have different realities for the UN, and we need to make sure that we're on both sides of the aisle because we are apolitical and independent. Hi.
What are the peacekeeping initiatives that the UN is working on, considering what's happening with Russia and Ukraine right now?
What is the UN doing? Sorry, I couldn't catch that.
What are the initiatives that they're taking
Of course.
to ensure that it doesn't go on further?
Of course. So from a purely conflict point of view, the only role that we play is around humanitarian assistance. So making sure that the countries around the Ukraine are properly financed and supported, because a lot of them reached out to the UN in the first instance and said, we can't afford to host all of these refugees, we need help, Romania. And so our job in that case was to make sure that they had access to the right funding, the right equipment, the right skills. They didn't have the right technical skills at one point, and so making sure the logistics of our delivery of humanitarian assistance is where it needs to be. But also the UN is responsible for some of the political dialogue that goes on behind the scenes, so some of the negotiations between Putin and his counterpart in the Ukraine. We help facilitate some of those meetings, we help support those meetings. We don't have a direct role to play with NATO. Obviously, that's an independent organization, but we do support anything to do with resolving their conflict as quickly as possible. So dealing with the political fallout of that. Again, the cost of oil, for example, that's having a massive impact on countries in the Global South. I think because they can't afford to pay for more oil or for more anything. The cost of grain, for example. Russia and the Ukraine account for more than a third of global grain. And so the cost of basic food supplies has shot through the roof simply because those two countries are now out of the global trading systems. The UN has a lot to do in those settings. If Russia and the Ukraine are now cut off from the global trading system, what does that mean for everyone else? And those are the kind of roles that the UN plays from a humanitarian perspective, from an economic fairness perspective, to make sure that, because there's a very real fear that there's a global famine on the way because countries in the Global South simply can't afford to meet the costs of hyperinflation. And so right now the urgency is around how do we prevent the famine from happening, how do we make sure it's contained early on. But yeah, in a few months' time you will hear a lot about the global famine or the fear of a global famine. And that's largely around the cost of oil and the cost of food, linked not only to COVID-19 and the recovery, but to the war in Ukraine.
I don't want to box you so much to say about this subject, but we talk about race, refugee, and ethnicity.
Sure.
Okay.
Anything goes.
Yeah, I would let you pick your spot on that. Race and refugee. What's the UN doing?
It's interesting because the refugees from Ukraine have been so widely accepted, but the refugees from Syria, I'm not sure if you remember a few years ago, it was a very different situation. There was a lot of hostility. These people would steal our jobs, these people would create a lot of terrorism, a lot of crime. We don't have the housing to support them, we don't have enough hospitals to support them. There was a very different reception to Syrian refugees than there are to Ukrainian refugees. And the UN is aware of that. The UN is doing the best that we can to just help expose issues around race, politics, religion, you name it. So people feel more comfortable when the refugees, I think someone said they look like us. There was a media article in the international media, and he said the reason people are so saddened by these Ukrainian refugees is because they look like us. Those are some of the examples that people use to justify their favoritism in situations like that. So the UN is doing our best to make sure that all refugees are treated equally, regardless of the color of their skin or their religion or their location. But refugee problems are humanitarian problems, and so you should be looking at those factors at all when you determine whether you assist them or not. It should just be human nature to open your door and say, this person needs a place to rest, and I'm going to do that for them. So the UN is trying to do right by that, because that's our ultimate vision, that refugees everywhere are treated equally, anywhere.
Sorry, I have another question. So, as an islander from Samoa,
yes,
I'm sure global trade, became more important and everything as more resources became available to this island as global trade expanded over the past, couple hundred years. In a lot of ways, in my mind, the Rio Grande Valley is a little bit of an island in itself. We're surrounded by Mexico on the side, so there's some trade barriers there. There's some international trade barriers. So I want to know if you have any insights or input as far as, as a Pacific Islander, how your people have dealt with trade and people in the past. I know your culture seems to be a very welcoming culture, and very happy and joyful culture. But what tips do you have for us here in the Rio Grande Valley, so on our little island surrounded by?
I think China does a very good job at that, and they're called exclusive economic zones. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept, but essentially they're on the coast of China, in the south, and because they're so far removed from mainland China, they were given special tax exemptions, they were given special trade access to the rest of the world. And that's a kind of model that we could replicate here in the Valley. I think you already have a very similar structure here in the Valley. But let me give you some insight into what happened in Samoa. Because global trade doesn't work for everyone. And in Samoa, for example, we started importing turkey tails and lamb flaps and all this kind of processed meat and very bad food from the rest of the world into Samoa. And overnight, an obesity pandemic occurred. And it's happening in the Caribbean, it's happening in Asia as well, where food is being imported from the rest of the world, but it's not nutritious, it's not healthy, it's not good for you, and it's creating unnecessary obesity in the local communities. So when people say, I love global trade, we need more of it, it's like, yes, but we also need to be aware of the potential dangers and drawbacks. On local businesses especially, small businesses tend to be very hurt by global trade and investment. You look at places like, Walmart. They're replacing smaller businesses that used to provide the same things that Walmart does. So those are the kind of ethical dilemmas that you're always dealing with when you're a smaller country like Samoa, or in your case, the Valley. But it's about uplifting the living standards of the communities and understanding the bigger picture. Why are we going into global trade and investment? How does it work for us? What can we do to ensure that we're protected against any potential drawbacks or challenges? You need to know what the Valley does best in order to market the Valley as a brand. And this goes back to marketing. So if people know, like if people think of oranges, for example, you guys export oranges to the rest of the United States, that's the kind of global branding that could go off to the rest of the world. New Zealand, there's chocolate in the back, if you don't know. New Zealand is trying to compete with Swiss and Belgium chocolate in Europe. Who has the best chocolate in the world? You can try some and let me know.
Any other questions?
Hi.
It's a little bit less of a serious question. Considering where you come from, do you have any traditional tattoos?
Yes. I have tattoos on my body, actually. Actually, the word tattoo comes from the Samoan word tatau. Samoans invented the word tattoo. And so the tattoo goes all the way down to my knees. Like it's a full body tattoo. So,
Wow.
yeah, pretty proud of it. But then I came here and all the Mexicans had tattoos and I was like, damn it! Everyone has tattoos in the Valley! I don't stand out! So, yeah. In New Zealand, I'm like the only one with tattoos. So everyone's like, oh, he's Samoan, he's Samoan. But here, I'm just another Mexican. Yeah, go right ahead.
When did you know that you wanted to become a diplomat?
In law school. So when I was in law school, I realized that being a lawyer is actually, well, a lot of my friends who were lawyers already, they were exhausted. They were overwhelmed with paperwork. They were racing from the courthouse to the law firm. They were working very late nights into the early mornings, and they were on something stupid like $45,000 or $50,000, the same as anyone else. And so I said, with the massive student loans that they had as well, I was thinking, do I want to do that? Do I want to end up there? Do I want to be as unhappy as they are? And so when I went to the job fair at college, we talked about that earlier, he was just like, why don't you become a diplomat? It's something different, but it's better paid, less stressful. You're often on vacation in the Bahamas. It's a lot more exciting than being in a courtroom or at a law firm. But you're still helping towards justice, because anyone who's a law student is interested in justice. But there's more than one way to deliver or execute justice. And so becoming a diplomat was still becoming a lawyer, but was more like an international lawyer rather than just an ordinary lawyer. So that was kind of how I justified my decision. I was still a lawyer, but I was just a lawyer for the whole world rather than the lawyer for my small town law firm in Alabama. Hi. Any questions? No? I think we're done. Oh, yes, go right ahead.
What is a successful tip that you have for us? So as college students, sometimes we do get burnout, and I know it can't compare it to you as a UN diplomat, but I guess what are some tips that you can give us?
Study tips, do you mean?
Or just successful advice?
Advice. Career advice. Oh, damn. I suck at this. Career advice is, you've heard it all before. That's the trouble with career advice. It's like, how do you give the students something they haven't heard before? That's not cheesy or cliche. And so I guess I go back to this idea that imagine doing something for the rest of your life, and does it make you happy? If not, you'll be constantly looking for something that makes you happy. So try to find that very early on, but most people don't. So it's just about trying a lot of different things. Don't limit yourself to just a small window of opportunity. Put your eggs in many baskets. Be a generalist rather than a specialist. That's the way that the world is moving right now. People have more than one job and more than one industry now. So the more that you are open, the more that you are liberal in the way that you're willing to work, the better. It's not so much about what you study, but more about what you can do, your skills, your transferable skills. Learn how to program, learn how to code, learn how to kind of do the things that will matter in 50 years' time, because that's where the world is moving right now. Yeah.
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
You mentioned that you offer internships at the UN, and most of the times they're competitive. A lot of people want to get internships at the UN.
Yes.
Is it possible that we can refer to you or get in contact with you, to get to know each other, and maybe you can give us a helping hand when applying for an internship at the UN?
One of the tragedies of the UN is that the vast majority of our internships are unpaid, and they're in cities like New York and Geneva. And for those who know New York and Geneva, they're very, very expensive cities. You're expected to fly there, and you're expected to find your own apartment, and then you're expected to turn up for work every day and not get paid. That's slowly changing, but there are still aspects of that culture embedded in the UN system. And often you have the sons and daughters of Saudi crown princes interning at the UN because they can afford it. The sons and daughters of princes in the Gulf region are very common interns. The daughter of the Chinese president was interning at the UN at one point. So the internship program at the UN is very elitist because it's unpaid and you need to be self-funded. But there are scholarships and financial assistance schemes available to those who are less fortunate. So definitely stay connected, stay in touch with me. I can put you in contact with the right sources. I can speak to the right people on your behalf. You'll probably go to New York because it's a lot closer than Geneva, and I have contacts there, so I'm more than happy to assist anyone. The Valley reminds me of my home in Samoa, so I have an affinity to the Valley and to people from the Valley, so I'm more than happy to do my part. That's why I'm here.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. In the back there. Yeah?
I know you mentioned that you have to deal with a lot of different
Very good question. I'm still learning, actually. I'm an introvert by nature, and so I'd rather be home on Friday night and not at a bar talking to like a random politician from the middle of nowhere. So you do kind of have to force it. I think there's a saying, fake it till you make it. That's probably not good advice for college students, but it really helped with me. You know, you smile, you shake hands, you give business cards. That's the nature of diplomacy on a daily basis. And so if you are too introverted, it can actually be unhealthy. Because, you know, diplomacy is about relationships. People need to trust you in order to connect with you. And so if you're kind of shy and kind of going off back here, they'll be like, I don't trust this dude, I don't know him, but he's giving me bad body language. And so the key there is about how humans interact every day. Like, don't overthink it. Diplomats are just people talking to other people. Like, if you keep it very simple and you understand why people need to trust you in order to trust the process, it becomes much easier. Like, when people see me, they don't actually see me. They see the UN. And so I'm representing the UN. I need to be able to be comfortable around them so that they trust the UN. Because if I screw this up, he's going to think the UN is, you know, pointless and ridiculous. So you kind of put yourself in that position and you tend to do a lot better. Hi.
A quick question, you know, on the jurisdiction, since we're on a pathway. So if you have folks who find the picture really interesting, but that are not motivated by that setting, you know, people who look at, you know, a refugee camp and find that motivate them.
Oh, yeah.
What's the pathway for them?
So there's a whole lot of jobs at the UN. You can be working in a conflict zone as like a peacekeeper, or at a humanitarian center as a process worker or an aid worker. There's something for everyone. Like, the majority of UN staff are not in places like this. They're in the field. They're at, you know, refugee camps. They're at war zones. They're treating people injured at a natural disaster or something like that. The UN is primarily on the ground. We're not in boardrooms. We're not at parliaments or the White House. You know, we're primarily on the ground. So if you're an engineer, if you're a construction worker, if you're an electrician, there's something for everyone. So don't feel as though you need to be wearing a suit every day. I'm not wearing a suit because I know it's tropical in the valley. Paul was like, why aren't you wearing a suit? I was like, it's too damn hot. So the UN is acceptable to anyone, everywhere.
So what's the pathway? So you know, we're talking about the internship, right?
Yes. So the internship, there's a policy element. So there are two what we call streams for UN internships, or grad roles as well. So we have grad roles which operate very similar to an internship. And it's either policy, which is stuff like this. This is meeting politicians, meeting governments. That's the policy side of the UN. But then there's the on the ground, you know, here and now in a conflict zone, in a humanitarian crisis. That's in the development setting, so making sure that people in the global south are properly, you know, with the technical skills and capacity building and stuff. So there's something for everyone in terms of those two streams. But you need to decide very early on when you're applying, do I want to be working in policy or do I want to be working on the ground for the UN? And once you've made up your mind, it becomes a lot easier to get into the channels. Because the UN is a massive organization. 194 countries belong to this organization. There are offices in every major city on the planet. So there's something for everyone. You could be anywhere, everywhere. Yes. Hi.
So would you say working for the UN involves a lot of teamwork and like networking?
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
also building relationships?
Yes. So yeah, it's multifaceted in the sense that you as an individual, like, you're always looking for your next promotion, your next, you know, jump. Because the UN is so bureaucratic that it's very hard to stand out. And so a lot of ambitious UN diplomats will be like, I've got to give the best speech so that I can be promoted, or I've got to do this or say this. And so there's an element of individualism in this, but there's also an element of teamwork. And the UN is only as strong as its team. So compromise and consensus, you know, those are the kind of words we use all the time. If you're not good at working in a team setting, the UN is probably not for you, because we don't have a role where you kind of just sit on your own and do your own thing. That kind of role doesn't exist at the UN. The UN is all about relationships, communities, groups, connecting people together. If you're not interested in that kind of stuff, you probably won't have a good time anyway. So being mindful about what the UN does and what it represents would make a big difference when you're considering applying for a job at the UN. You will be meeting people all the time. Like, before joining the UN, I never thought that I would be speaking at a university in Texas, and here we are. So understanding that you can't be at home on your computer working for the UN, you have to be out there meeting people and talking to communities. Hi, in the back.
Yeah,
I see.
yes, sorry.
That's a very good question. Yeah, so I did do the internship. I was financed on a scholarship from New Zealand, so the New Zealand government. So check out if the US government is offering opportunities like that, because I couldn't finance it. I was already very near New York. So I did the internship while I was at Yale, and for those who don't know, Yale is not too far from New York anyway, so the commute wasn't too bad. But being an intern at the UN in New York meant that I had access to like all the top managers, all the people with influence, all the movers and shakers of the UN, if you like. You get a lot of access if you're a UN intern. So make the most of that opportunity very early on to establish those connections with all the right people. Use the UN website to know who the important people are, and then when you see them at the UN, track them down, introduce yourself, get to know them. You know, that's usually, it's who you know. In politics, it's who you know rather than what you know. And so if you know the right people, you can climb the ladder a lot faster. So those connections very early on in your internship will make a big difference. And so because of that, I was able to move quite quickly through the ranks. I've been there for 12 years now, and I'm kind of near middle management, so that's how slowly things move at the UN, but I'm very comfortable with where I am now, and so, yeah, that's it. But don't be prepared, like, when you become a UN intern, there's this perception that you go straight into the big meetings with like Joe Biden and all these top dogs. That's not how it works. You start by making coffees, photocopying documents. You start off with the very boring stuff. But you've got to start somewhere. And you need to kind of accept that that's the reality for a lot of graduate level jobs. You're not going to start off, living the extravagant lifestyle. On the contrary, you're going to start off doing very boring secretarial kind of stuff. But the more you do that, the higher you climb. So patience is probably a very good message there. That, things are not going to look up for you for a while just because you're an intern at the UN. There's still a long way to go after that to make sure that your job security is, because some jobs have fixed terms, so the job security at the UN is not as great as it could be. And so being mindful that the UN may not be a long-term pathway for you, but it could lead to consulting gigs, like a lot of people become private consultants after working at the UN or join another organization like the IMF. The USAID program, for example, the State Department. There's still a lot of other external opportunities if you lose your job at the UN.